Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security for the State of Israel. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in to this briefing. It's a great privilege to be able to share with you behind the headlines what is happening here on the ground in Israel. And it's a great privilege to be joined today by Brigadier General Amir Avivi, the founder and chairman of IDSF. General, what can you share with us about what is happening in this war right now?
Well, maybe I'll start by talking about the announcements we saw in this last couple of days from the Minister of Defense and also from Benny Gantz. Minister of Defense was saying that he's worried about the fact that Israel hasn't defined a clear day after for Gaza. And following that, we had Benny Gantz giving a time frame saying if by 3 weeks, 6 different things don't happen, we leave the government. He talked about a solution for the hostages. He talked about defining a clear date for returning our citizens in the north. He talked about the Saudi deal. But I can say that all these things he talked about are not really something that we control. It's not, I mean, Israel tried really hard to find a solution with the hostages. Everything we suggested and was approved by the US and the Egypt and Qatar. Hamas, every single suggestion rejected completely. Defining a date for returning the citizens in the north is something I don't see how we can do, because we don't know if there will be a war or not in the north. Can we reach a deal and get Hezbollah to withdraw? Not likely. And if we are going to war, we cannot really go to war before we finish with Rafah. And Benny Gantz didn't mention Rafah at all. So how much time it's going to take, and then how much time to bring the forces north, and then how much time are we trying to negotiate a deal, or immediately are we going to war? So I would say there is very little really Prime Minister can offer. He cannot solve all these issues. And then the Prime Minister challenged Benny Gantz and said to him, okay, let me understand. Are you in favor of conquering Rafah or not? Will we have to do a deal with Saudi Arabia and for doing this deal do a two-state solution, which is devastating for Israel? And Benny, and also about the day after, if Benny wants the Palestinian Authority. So Benny Gantz answered pretty much immediately and said, I'm supporting conquering Rafah. I think that the day after there shouldn't be not Hamas, not the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and also not the Palestinian Authority. And he said, to his knowledge, we don't require a two-state solution for a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia. And then also the Minister of Defense that got really, really attacked by his own supporters from the right, made it clear that he's not supporting the Palestinian Authority to manage. So really, when I clean up all the noises and talks and everything, I would say that there are some serious agreements. Like, okay, they all support conquering Rafah. Good news. And the IDF is indeed every day enlarging more and more the attack on Rafah. We started with 2 brigades, now it's 4 brigades, and probably more will come. And the IDF is constantly advancing in Rafah and taking control of Philadelphia and finding tunnels along the border, but we're not really yet attacking the most dense area in the Rafah city. But this seems to be moving forward, and at least everybody declared clearly and openly they are all in favor of conquering Rafah. Today, the Minister of Defense tweeted that he met Sullivan and told him clearly that we need to conquer Rafah. Well, this is another thing showing us that this is actually happening. I feel that unfortunately our cabinets are dealing with politics more than the war itself. It's terrible. I really resented both the Minister of Defense and Gantz declarations. I think that these discussions need to be in the cabinet and not in the open. I think that what really there is not a clear enough understanding is that if you don't want the Palestinian Authority, and rightly so, to build from scratch a new solution and try to find some kind of alternative leadership within the Palestinians in Gaza, it's a process. It's not going to happen in a day. The day after Hamas, you need Israel to control everything. And even before that, I mean, if, for example, we control everything in northern Gaza, if we control humanitarian aid, then we can direct this aid to children and women and not to terrorists that are fighting us, and get them in a week or two to surrender because they will be without food or water. But we're not doing so. We're not using the full spectrum of tools that an army has to win against its enemies. And doing a siege against the terrorists, something that must be done. I'm not talking about not giving food to citizens. I'm talking about the terrorists. But for this, you need to control the humanitarian aid, and the IDF is not doing so. And this is endangering our soldiers. And also to be in the position of even discussing with Palestinians that are not part of the Palestinian Authority or Hamas a path towards some kind of local leadership. This requires first Israel to control things, because without that, they won't even talk to us. They'll be frightened that Hamas is still controlling Gaza. So I think that politically we are in a very delicate situation that might impact badly Israel. I think that if Benny Gantz leaves the government, this is very bad for the unity we need to sustain this war that is going to be very long and probably also in the north. I would hope he won't do that, and I hope that if he does, other parties will join, maybe Saar or Lieberman, but I'm not a political expert, so I don't know. The government basically can function without Gantz, but I think that it's not the same. Now, what Gantz is doing is pretty much coordinated with all these demonstrations that were intensifying inside Israel. I think there is a clear plan to do anything possible to get Israel into elections before November. Why before November? Because this is something that the administration believes that if they manage to do it with guns and so on, they'll be able to push the policies they want to push, a two-state solution and normalization with Saudi Arabia and stopping the war, which basically means Israel will lose the war. It's completely against what the Israeli people want. Israeli people want unity. They want the cabinet to concentrate on the war. But there are forces in work that are very troubling. Our messaging is very, very, very strong and clear. Unity above all, winning above all, no politics, no elections. This is exactly what Hamas wants. This is how Hamas defines win. They know that if we go into elections, we lose the war. Israel will not sustain the war. And they were trying to really push politicians and the society to really push for unity and not for dealing with politics now. As these things are evolving, we saw the accident in Iran with the death of their president Raisi and the minister of exterior. It's hard to say what this will do, but for sure the Iranians are going to be a bit busy with the internal politics themselves. Does it affect by any way what's going on in Israel? I'm not sure. It's not clear, hard to say. We'll have to see how this evolves. It's not clear where this is going and if it's affecting at all the war in the region and the proxies and so on. So we'll have to wait and see. Moshe?
General, thank you for sharing that. I want to go back to this issue about Benny Gantz's demands for June 8th, which seem impossible. You know, part of it includes a plan for normalization with the Saudis, an understanding for the ultra-Orthodox draft. I mean, to do in 2.5 weeks, these things seems would be a miracle. Are you able to speak a little bit about what you've said in the past about Hamas's strategy of battlefield victory versus destabilizing Israel? I think that's an important thing for our audience to hear. Potentially how what's happening in the war cabinet feeds into that.
Yeah, I mean, Hamas know from day one they cannot win on the battlefield. I mean, the IDF, everywhere the IDF goes, they are destroying Hamas. And Hamas stands no chance in the battlefield. So they rely on two main things. One is international pressure, hoping that it will amount to such a level that Israel will be forced to stop the war because of ICC, because of these arrest warrants that now the prosecutor in the ICC wants to have against Netanyahu and Gallant, because of the US pressure not to go to Rafah and basically lose the war. So they rely a lot on international pressure. And the other thing is that they rely on Israel destabilizing from inside, demonstrations, and eventually elections. And because of that, they have no incentive to release hostages, because the more they don't release hostages, the more you see demonstration. And when they see that they are not releasing hostages, but the blame goes to the government, works well for them. Why release hostages? This makes the hostages a very powerful tool to completely destabilize Israel. So when the cabinet starts, when you have members in the cabinet who want to push for elections, and Benny Gantz already talked about elections 2 months ago, this exactly plays to the hands of the Hamas and their strategy. And unfortunately, we have more than one player that wants elections. We have the administration that wants elections. We have Hamas that want elections. And we have part of our politicians and society who want elections. And Hamas knows that elections will be losing the war. So it's not really a good idea. And I think that overall speaking, I believe that following the war and after the war, maybe all 120 MKs need to go, all of them, all the politicians need to go. The Israeli society is fed up with this political system, and definitely it would be reasonable to demand that not only the leadership of the IDF and the Shin Bet, but also our political leadership will understand that they are responsible for what happened. And it's not only this government, it's also the previous one. It's basically all the parties. And it's reasonable to ask a huge change, but not in the middle of a war. I mean, you don't endanger the whole society and lose a war because of politics. Even if we think that everyone needs to go or Netanyahu needs to go and so on. From a really national security point of view, it's wrong to destabilize now the government. We have the most experienced people at the moment in a very, very complex reality, dealing with very complex issues, trying to bring new people with no experience to try and deal with this huge, massive pressure internationally, and with really how complicated things are on the battlefield and regionally and so on. It doesn't make sense. It's not serious. So I am hoping that this won't happen. I'm hoping that while we are not yet achieving the goals of war, we didn't destroy Hamas yet, we didn't bring back the hostages, we didn't create the terms for preventing a future army in Gaza, and we didn't deal with the North. There are many missions to do. I think we need to achieve them first before we think about politics.
Thank you. A lot of people are asking for more clarity on this. So if I could just ask a follow-up question, meaning you agree that down the line, we need new leadership in the government, and you agree that destabilizing Israel right now is absolutely a bad thing, and bringing in inexperienced people is not good. But what's to say that a new government at this moment couldn't bring in the right people to fix the current problems, as opposed to destabilizing to provide more unity? Meaning, why is it so clear that that wouldn't happen if we went to elections right now, for example?
Because we have hostages. You go to elections and the politicians are dealing with elections, or they have to win elections. They're not going to deal with the war. Do we seriously want our leaders in the middle of a war to say, okay, we don't want to deal with the war? Everything we decide will be decided upon considerations that have to do with elections and not with winning a war? What interest do we want the politicians to pursue? And so I think that just like we know that the leadership of the IDF needs to go, but we say to the chief of staff, okay, yes, you are responsible for the 7th of October, but first, you are the chief of staff, go and win the war. And when we gave him our support and the leadership of the army, the ones that failed on the 7th of October to win this war, we are giving them our children to fight under their leadership. So I think that really in this very defining moment, we need unity. We need to be concentrated on winning the war. What will the soldiers feel like when they're fighting in Gaza if what interests our politicians is elections? What's the message to our soldiers? If unifying is not important enough, so why are we sending our soldiers to die? If this war is not important, so why are they dying? So you cannot tell people to go and fight and risk their lives and then say that priority number one is politics and not winning the war.
Thank you for that clarity. I want to go back to another issue you raised, and thank you again to all of our viewers for sending in your questions, either in the chat right now or prior to these briefings, emails to me. General, you mentioned a little bit about supplying Hamas and the need to siege them, need to make sure that they can't have the fuel and the supplies they need to fight. So there was a analyst, I think it was last week, who put out a number that he believes since the beginning of the war, Hamas has earned $500 million just from the aid trucks going into Gaza. And at the same time, now there's this U.S. Port where with this pier, I should say, and now supplies are going into Gaza. So how does the IDF handle this? Providing supplies to the citizens, to the residents, I should say, of Gaza, but at the same time cutting off Hamas.
So what's happening now is that we simply send this humanitarian aid into Gaza with no real control, in a way that Hamas easily seizes this humanitarian aid, and then they get control of it. They give it to their terrorists, and also they control the society, they feed them. Instead of that, the IDF needs to take control of all the humanitarian aid, distribute it in a controlled way, overseeing who gets the food, making sure it's only civilians and not terrorists. And it's a logistical issue, how to do it. And by doing that and preventing the terrorists from reaching humanitarian aid, then they can control. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a pier or a truck or from the air. This is just different ways of bringing a humanitarian aid. It's technical. The matter is who distributes it. So if Israel takes the humanitarian aid from the pier and Israel distributes it, or Israel takes the trucks that are coming from Israel and Israel distributes the food, this is the issue. Not technically if it comes from the sea, from the land, or from the air. If it comes from the sea, and it happens now, Israel is bringing this humanitarian aid, but instead of dealing with the distribution, it simply sends it out into Gaza, and then we lose control. So we need to make sure that everything grows through us, and we actually have a plan how to distribute it in a way that the terrorists don't get anything, and then really it won't take long until they'll surrender, having no food or water.
Thank you, General. Last question, because we're just about out of time. It seems that there are more troops on their way or being stationed in Gaza. Are we seeing now a ramp up in the Rafah operations?
We have more and more brigades at the moment, and every day or two there is another brigade joining the fight in Rafah. And I think that once really we see the IDF in full-scale attack into the Rafah city, then we'll see many things happening. Hopefully reaching the leadership of Hamas, reaching hostages, as we did in the last few days, when we released bodies of hostages, taking control of the border. Rafah is the key for victory. And every day that we are going more and more inside gets us closer to victory in Gaza.
Brigadier General Amir Avidi, thank you so much for sharing this briefing with us. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.